let's get back to the best. I'm interested. Is it best, Henderson's best? Because, like my mother would say, my mother was English, and she would say, get the best butter out of the fridge, as opposed to the margarine, right, or the margarine. So the best butter was real butter, but it wasn't superior butter. It was just the definition between margarine and butter. Best, pint best. I've got right here. Tell me the story about the word best.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for starting us off. When I was right out of high school, I got my very first job as a brewer. And I worked at a brewery here in town that made a beer called Connor's. This was in 1989. And Connor's was an English-style brewery. In fact, they were named after the Ale Connor, which was the tax collector that used to go around and collect the money for the beer sales. Have you heard of the Ale Connor?
No, I've never heard of the Ale Connor.
The Ale Connor, the way that he would test the proof of the beer is that he would spill some beer on his stool, and he would sit on the stool while he drank a pint of beer. And if he stuck to the stool, it meant that the sugars hadn't fermented out and the alcohol level was too low, and he would fine those people. So this brewery called Connor's, no, it's okay. I mean, you could try it if you like, but we have a machine that does it now. So this brewery that I worked at in 1989, Connor's, we made a best bitter. Now, as you probably know, with some English background, bitter is a style of English beer, which it doesn't mean it's bitter, they just call it bitter.
Yeah.
And exactly like your butter example, when you ordered a best bitter, you got not the best, but the better. So a better bitter. Betty butter, what's a butter? So in 1989, when I was brewing this best bitter, I fell in love with the style, and when we opened up this brewery, I kind of wanted to start with this style. But one of the things I learned between 1989 and 2014 is that Canadians don't really jive with a beer if it's called bitter. So we removed that and just called it best.
Nice. Well, it's excellent. And I think in 1989 I was making beer in my bathtub. And I don't know what people called it.
I'm sure they drank it.
Oh, we drank it. Yeah, we drank that beer.
It's funny because last week we launched a beer. We have a trophy that we award here at the brewery to the best home brewer in Toronto. So last week we launched this beer for the winning home brewer. He brewed it here. It was like the prize. And when I told him that I had been a brewer and a home brewer in the 80s, he couldn't believe it, because if you were making beer in your bathtub, so was I. Anyway, we've moved well off of the topic. I'm going to pull us back on course. I have some notes.
Oh yeah, okay, you got notes.
Yeah.
So you read the book.
I did read the book.
What do you think?
I like the book.
Good, that's good.
I mean, do you want me to tell you about the book?
I think I know about the book, Steve. I think I'm aware of the book and what's in the book, but I'm interested if you liked it. Tell me one thing. If you had to take my book, or if my book was torn up and you're on a desert island, and one page came in a bottle, one image, what would it be out of the book? What's the one image you remember from the book? One little thing.
Well, I think now I read the book a year ago, a bit of a cheat. Hang on a second. But what has stayed with me in that time is the sort of the sparseness of the landscape, but in the most, you know when the day is cold, and you don't really want to go outside because the day is cold, but when you go outside and you take that first deep breath, you have this feeling of exhilaration in the winter. I kind of got that sense from reading this book, that despite the fact that there was a lot of less than excellent circumstances and contexts and locations.
I gotta buy this book. There's less than excellent situations in this book.
No, but then I said it's like the deep breath that makes you think this is a wonderful place.
I'll tell you about landscape. Okay, I'll tell you about all the landscapes in the book, and the reason why I write about the land, because Steve brought it up and he remembers it. It's for you to believe in the dialogue. That's the only reason why I write about landscape. It's like, if you don't believe where the people are standing, you're not going to believe what they're saying to each other. So I nailed down landscapes very well. And in terms of coldness, sparseness, it reminds me that even now, when I'm writing, like I wrote today, I wrote this morning, and and it's cold where I write in my little room where I write, and I've got this little down vest. I got it at the Valley Village, and it's a medium. It's too small for me, but I intentionally got it because before I write for 3 hours in the cold, I put it on, and when I zip it up, it gives me a little hug, and it's like a reassuring hug from this too small vest to say, Michael, it's going to be all right. You can get through the next 3 hours. So that's what's going on when I'm writing.
Okay. I don't know where to go with that, really, actually, but
you read the book.
I did
a year ago, and you have some questions.
Yeah. I thought that's the purpose of this, kind of, really. Anyway, what was weird about when I read the book is that I was going on a holiday, and I asked the folks at Nancy, could you suggest a couple of books for me when I'm on holiday? And one of the books they gave me was this book. So I actually read your book like on a beach in Mexico.
Oh, this is really good. Okay, this is excellent because this is something I tell people when you're thinking about writing. Okay, like everybody has. There'll be a lot of people in this room that are writers or trying to write a book, and this is a very important thing that Steve's brought up, which is he read this book about a very cold place in Newfoundland on a beach in Mexico. That contrast is really good. Now, what I'm telling you is this. I tried to write the beach story. I wrote the story about a time when I was on the beach in Nova Scotia, like a holiday. Rented a little place, went there, 2 weeks in the sun on the beach. It was really nice. I wrote that thing over and over again, trying to make it interesting, and it didn't work. And then I wrote the story about this woman's mother or her father who died of cancer in Winnipeg. And it was a story I knew about, and I'd written it, and I wrote about, because it's about cancer, right? It's an important thing, cancer, the death of a parent. It's somber and it's serious. And I wrote that thing, I wrote that thing down into the ground. It was so bad, such a bad story, my writing of it. And then one day I remembered, combine the two. And so I wrote the story that never happened. I wrote the story where this couple was going to Nova Scotia for 2 weeks, and they were driving there, and on the way, the wife's phone rings. Yes, hello, hi Dad, hi Mom, Dad's in hospital? Okay. Babe, what's the matter? Dad's got cancer, he's going to die. Okay, well, when we get to Halifax, what we'll do is if things go bad, you can fly from Halifax to Winnipeg, and and if everything's okay, then we can still have our vacation. Long pause. Who did I marry? Are you a monster? I thought I married a loving man. And then he turned the car around, and they drove to Winnipeg. And they spent 2 weeks in Winnipeg, and on the last night of her father's life, it was his turn to be there through the night to hold him. And during the night, his father-in-law, beckoned to him, and he could hardly breathe, and he kneeled down and he said something into his son-in-law's ear. And what he said made him realize why he had married this woman. And it made him feel like he just spent 2 weeks on a beach. Now that's a story. Woo! Yeah, but you need the both. You see, that never happened, but you combine the two. You can combine that deadly cancer story and the frolicking beach story. You merge them together and make something new, but it's still emotionally true, even though the facts are all wonky. So I'm glad you read my book on a beach.
Well, okay. What was great about reading your book on the beach? I mean, you've trumped my story by a lot, but I was on a holiday. Like, I was opening up this brewery. It was a lot of chaos, a lot of things.
I was on a break.
Yeah, and the great thing about reading your book on a beach is that I went on this holiday to just relax. And your book, which I found to be just incredibly spacious and uncluttered, in terms of the way that the story unfolds and the dialogue, was I got the best of both worlds. I got the simplicity of not having to choose my wardrobe in the morning and somebody bringing me a drink with an umbrella, and I got the simplicity of a beautiful but simple story where I could follow the narrative, and the interaction between the characters was not as complicated as it could have been.
You see, it's really interesting to hear him say this, because Steve is actually mirroring the reason why I wrote the book in the first place, which is that I've never written a novel before. I've written one, but it was like a sort of a diary. It's a historical novel, and I had a couple of friends who were writing historical, they were from Newfoundland, like Wayne Johnston, just written Colony of Unrequited Dreams, and like truckloads of money were coming into his house and dumping off these big tandem loads of money, dumping into his living room. And one day I was there, and like Wayne was up to his neck in money. And I thought, man, if that guy can write a historical novel, like surely I can. So I thought, how hard could it be? So I wrote this book. I just thought, okay, I don't know anything about plot, but somebody told me about this American painter, Rockwell Kent, who came to Newfoundland in 1914, and then the World War I broke out, and he was kicked out for being a German spy. And I thought, okay, that's like a Clint Eastwood movie, like a stranger comes to town, bad things happen, stranger leaves town. Like that's my storyline. I need that if I'm going to spend the next 3 years writing this book. And I've been reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy, and I love Cormac McCarthy, and I just thought, okay, Cormac McCarthy writes these southern westerns. I'm going to write a maritime western. I'm going to write a saltwater version of Cormac McCarthy. How bad could it be? So I wrote this book, and I gave it to my girlfriend to read. And she read the book, and she laughed, and she cried, and she gave me back the manuscript, and she said, Michael, this is really bad. It's really bad. She said, you're no Cormac McCarthy. You're being derivative. And I realized an important thing, which is, as a writer, you have to write within your own limitations. Like, you might love other writers, but you may not be able to write like them. Like, figure out what your limitations are and write within them. So I went back to Wayne Johnson. I said, Wayne, tell me the definition of a historical novel. And he said, well, Michael, it's when the events of the novel take place prior to the author's birth. So I thought about that, and then I realized something. I realized that Rockwell Kent, the artist, didn't die until his 90s. When I was alive when he died, and so if I wrote the novel as if I was a really old Rockwell Kent, then it wouldn't be a historical novel. It would be during my lifetime. And I could circumvent the trouble of Cormac McCarthy and all that stuff, which I'm not very good at. And if I mentioned, for instance, which I think I do mention in the book, like a helicopter, like in 1914, like that historical anachronism, it's just an old man, like getting things wrong. Like it's not, there's no trouble with the narrative. It's not me. So that's how I managed to get to this story of the writing of the story and how it came to be. Next question.
I haven't even looked. I don't want to look at the questions. This is too much fun. I mean, I guess what I find intriguing is this is 375 pages or so, and you gave the synopsis, I think, in about 12 words, right?
Yes.
Stranger comes into town, bad things happen, stranger leaves town.
I was interested, like he was a vegetarian, and I was just thinking, like, when I've got a summer house in Newfoundland, and when I'm there, like I eat everything, but I like vegetables. I prefer them. But man, try to find them in Newfoundland. And I just thought, this guy was here 100 years ago, and he was a vegetarian. Like, what did he eat? Like, so I'm thinking, and so these things, I researched these things, but there's no answer to it. There's no answer to what he ate. So then you just cut that stuff. You don't say what he's eating. He just says, I ate.
I think he did I think he got invited to dinner a couple of times.
There's a great little scene, because I just thought, okay, if I'm going to have this vegetarian come to Newfoundland, I'm really going to give it to him. So I have, the very first day when he's in Newfoundland, he's on the train, and one thing you always do when you're writing is if your characters have to get somewhere, don't let them get there. If a character's wanting to do something, don't let them do it. Like, that's really good. So the train, and this was called the Newfie Bullet, and it was ironic because it never got where it was going. It was always a snowstorm that always stopped. And so they end up snowshoeing to where they're having to go. And he's with these teenage kids who are taking care of him. And they catch a rabbit, and they eat the rabbit, and they have a little bacon, and they cook the bacon, and then they pour the bacon fat into a mug, and they all drink it, the bacon fat. You don't let that waste, right? And Rocco Kent is watching this, and he can't help but say to them, kind of snarkily, kind of like a New Yorker, like, in the woods, saying, like, what do you do, like, when you notice the cup had a rind of bacon fat that had congealed on the rim of it, and then it had done that several times over they said, what do you do when it finally, congeals over with bacon fat? And they said, oh, we just ream it out and start over again. So that was the vegetarian's introduction to the cuisine of Newfoundland.
I had a friend who was a vegetarian. He was flying in Africa, and they brought him the chicken, and he says, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian." And they said, "Yeah, I know." And that was the. All right. Anyway, okay. So you're a man who likes to tell stories. I feel like I say 3 words and you say 300. So let me ask you this: you haven't written a book in a little while.
Sweet Lord! What the hell?
Is that true? No, here's why. I was doing some research on...
I either get, this is what I've been getting, okay? I either get the thing of like, wow, you're prolific, right? Which is like, what, I write too much? And now, because I've had a youngster, right? And I'm trying to, like raise a youngster and be a good dad. Like 3 years have gone by since my last book. 3 years, come on, Steve, it's not that bad.
I wasn't going to say anything, but it seems like you have a lot to... your mind just triggers up and boom, there's a story.
I'll tell you, okay, this is another thing. This is the thing, like when you're young, like I was young when I wrote this book, younger. And this thing happens, okay, it happens to all artists, not just writers, it's painters and everybody. And this is the thing, when you're young, you could write a book. It's really easy to write a book. And there's like if I could make a graph, okay, in the on Steve's wonderful chalkboard here. There's a little graph here, okay, and this is the line that indicates your artistic talent, okay, like here over time, okay. It's going up. It's good. It's going up. It's good. But this is the other line, which is your critical eye. Okay, this is right here. This is the talent line. There's your critical eye. See what happens? You realize at a certain age that you're just mediocre. You read so many good books, you see so many good paintings, you see so many movies, you realize these people can do it so better than me. Why do it? And that's why a lot of people my age don't continue writing or painting or making films or making music. Their critical eye has grown larger than your talent. It's crushing. And so one thing, you're looking at me a little concerned. It's okay. I've almost finished my book. It's okay. It's there you go. You got to ignore the critical eye. You got to just to tell the critical eye to leave the room. And I mean, the other thing too is like everybody's writing on laptops, right? That have the Wi-Fi, like all that stuff. This is really bad. Like I've got a laptop that doesn't have access to the internet, because I realized about a year ago that the internet is like a little puppy in a room, and your novel is like a green corpse that smells in another room. That's what your novel is. And every morning, if you come into the room and you see the little puppy, and you see the green corpse, it doesn't take too much to know which room you're going to. So you don't need that you don't need the little puppy. You gotta get rid of the puppy, and you gotta go in there, you gotta climb onto the green corpse. You gotta embrace the head of this decomposing body and breathe life into it every day. Next question.
It's like you are the Harlem Globetrotters, and you're doing all this stuff, and then when the play's over, you say, then what? And you're coming back to me like I have to have something.
Come on, referee. Mid ball, ref.
Gosh, I don't know where to go from there. I mean, what I was gonna ask you if, because I turned 50 this year, I think you're around 50.
Yeah.
I found that 50 was really motivating for me to do things.
Great.
But then and that's why I was going to ask you about the writing, but you are writing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is just...
I don't have to say anything. I'm just going to read our menu.
No. Yes. This is for people to realize, like, I write every morning. I just write 3 hours. Like, as soon as my son goes to school until noon, I write. And I realized this a few years ago because often I wouldn't write. And then I would go and meet a friend, for lunch or something. And I would sit there and I'd look at my friend with this face of hate. I would hate my friend. And my friend, like for a long time you forget, like you don't think people can read a face. Like you can mask it, But people, for whatever reason, they can sense when you hate them, when you loathe their presence, when you despise the fact that they live, and then you hate yourself too. It's a nuancy thing, but people can pick it up. Don't fool yourself. You're not hiding anything. And so I would do that. I would hate my life for the rest of the day and who I was with, and I was terrible to live with. And then I realized if I just wrote in the morning, those 3 hours, I'd be the greatest guy to hang out with because I'd done my work. I'd sat there for 3 hours. I may not have written much, but I did it. I sat in that chair and I freaking sat there for 180 minutes or whatever 3 hours is, and I did it. So it's really important to do that. And the other thing is, I took out this little notebook, right, and I wrote down about the best butter and the A.L. Connor guy. It's a really good image, right? See this little book? It's a CIBC passbook, banking book. See, if you ever say to anybody in your family, like, excuse me, family, but I'm thinking I want to write a novel. You know what you'll get, for your birthday or under the Christmas tree, or you get this little package. Open it up. You know what's in it? It's a moleskin notebook. It's a little leather-bound black moleskin acid-free paper that Bruce Chapman wrote in, like all these novelists wrote in them, and because they want to encourage you. And I'm telling you right now that those moleskin notebooks are the worst thing ever invented for a writer. Do you know why? Because they're so beautiful that you're on the bus and you see something and you think, oh yeah, I should write that down because I'm a writer. I'll just open up my bag and take up my moleskin notebook and I'll write down what I just heard someone say to somebody else because it's really interesting. And so one thing, you gotta you gotta unzip your bag, you gotta take out this book, you gotta open it up, this beautiful book, and you realize you're on the bus and like your handwriting isn't gonna be very good. So you think, well, it's a beautiful book, I don't want to mar the book. I'll just wait until I get home and I'll write it down then. You won't write it down, you'll forget it. Okay? So I have these little bank books that you can still get at the bank for nothing, for free. They're a sewn signature. They're ugly, but I fill them up with notes. You see? So every day while I'm not writing, I'm still working. And if I've written those 3 hours in the day, things are kind of percolating along. If you don't write, if you wait for those 3 weeks in your writing retreat in a cottage up north or something, it's going to kill you because you're not living in the story day by day. And when you're living in the story day by day, you remember things, or you think, oh yeah, that would be a good connection between those two things. So that character could meet that character, while you're not writing. So write every day, and keep little notebooks that are right here, not in a bag, right here, a little notebook and a pen. Okay, so you can just write things down immediately.
Now I happen to notice in doing a bit of research, I've never met this guy before, So I needed to learn a little bit about you, and I got stuck in a wormhole on your Twitter feed. And one of the things I find intriguing about your Twitter feed is you seem to write a lot all the time. And it's a lot of those sorts of things, I think. In fact, there was some comment about CIBC bank books in your Twitter feed. So I'm wondering, you must be distracted, or is that just in the second half of the day only that you're...
No, only in the second half of the day. And the other thing is, this is another great thing about this is like a writing class here now, okay? Because I know a lot of you want to write, and I want to encourage it. This is what can happen, okay? I'm out on the street, and I see a man with his arms folded, and he's crossing the street. And his arms start to bark. And then I see this little set of ears. So what do? I take out my little notebook, right? And I write it down. I go, there was a man crossing the street with a dog in his arms, and the dog started to bark. Interesting, right? But that's not what happened. See, it's hindsight. Hindsight is the death of narrative. It's the death of drama. I have to return to the world before I knew it. And what I saw was, I saw a man with his arms folded, and his arms started to bark. That's what I saw. I saw his arms barking. I got to write that down. His arms were barking. And then I saw a set of ears. I haven't even used the word dog. I haven't said the word dog. You have supplied the dog. See? So keeping a notebook like that, when you sit down for those 3 hours to write, it's practice for you to avoid hindsight, to avoid the world as you know it is, back to, I'm puzzled about the world, reader. Dear reader, come with me as I figure out the world. That's interesting. That's where you want the reader to be. So that's why I keep a notebook.
Okay, so you've told me about the dedicated 3 hours of writing. You've told me about the notebook. You clearly can turn an idea into a story very quickly, but you've also told me about the arc, the crossing of the critical eye
And the talent level.
Yeah. So when you wrote this book, I'm guessing it was pre-critical eye in terms of it sort of wrecking your life, and now I feel like you're in the post-critical eye period. Am I correct? I'm just trying to get how all these things come together, because there's so much of it.
Yeah, you're always out chasing your critical eye. You've got to leave the critical eye alone. You've got to pretend that you're still naive, that you don't know anything, and writing from there. Rather than, like, there's too many things in the world that want to censor you, that want you not to write the book. If you ever are with somebody who actually asks you about your writing, who encourages you to write, makes room in their lives for you to write, never let that person go. Okay? They are rare, because my experience is most people really don't care that you're writing, and rightly so, and that you feel like I should be the person to go and do that thing because all I'm doing is sitting here writing a book. It's really hard to gather up the gumption every day to say, actually, this is important. I'm staying right here for these 3 hours doing this. So that's part of the critical eye, right? It's a censoring thing of the insecurity that what you're doing is not important. And I think that's the thing that you have to just kind of be very stubborn about. And just, like my sister, Kathleen Winter, she writes, she's older than me, and she was a single mother for a while. Her first husband died, and her kids used to bang on her door, screaming at her to come out and play with them, and she would just say calmly to them, look, I'm writing for 3 hours. Go and play with yourselves. I'll be your mother 3 hours from now. But right now, I'm a writer. And they hated it, but now they're in their 20s. And they're young women, and I saw them say to my sister, now looking back, I'm really glad you did that. Like especially for women, women are often in a place where they are subservient. They're the ones that give in and do the other thing rather than art. And they're really impressed with their mother now. And it was great to see that. You know, that in the long run, hopefully, it's a good thing to be a bit of an asshole.
Okay, can I ask a full question now? It's going to be my last question because I'm going to ask if anybody else would like to ask questions to Michael. The book that we're doing next month is a book called Shrewd, and it's a book about women finding their voice, and it's definitely worth reading, and I recommend it. But this is a question for you because her first chapter in this book is called "Your Inner Voice is an Asshole." And when hearing you talk about the critical eye, I can't help think that you and she are talking about the same kind of thing. But my question is this, and I'd like to ask this about anybody who writes. I've never written, I don't know what it's like. When I read, I still read purely as a reader. I don't have a critical eye. But I'm a musician, and as a musician, I no longer hear music without the critical eye. And sometimes the critical eye really screws up the music I'm listening to, because instead of listening to the song, I'm listening to why do you choose that tone or that note? You know, as a writer who is battling the critical eye, and who is writing 3 hours a day, and who is keeping notes, how has that affected you as a reader? And can you still get the pleasure from reading that you did before the critical eye crept in?
Okay, there's a couple things there. Sometimes I'll hear somebody, say, I didn't really like this book, but I felt obliged to finish it. And I'm completely astonished by this. Like that somebody would feel like they have to finish a book, otherwise somebody might feel bad, or the writer might hear about it and be upset or something like that. If you don't like something, just fire it across the room. Like there's 100 million things out there to read. So I'm constantly firing things across the room. Constantly. And I'm looking for... Inner Voice is a really good one because I wrote this entire book from... Ronald Kent was a real person, a painter, who had written a number of books as well about his life and about painting. And at the same time, I'd read about this Dr. Wilfred Grenfell, who was in Newfoundland at the same time. He'd done the Grenfell mission. He had all these hospitals in Labrador. And he had written books. Grenfell had written these books. And if you read these books now about Grenfell, they're like he's lost on an ice pan in the ocean, and he has to eat his dogs, to survive. It's those kinds of books. And if you read them now, you can't read them. They're so dated. They're so bad. But he was writing for an audience. He was writing with a public voice. Now, on his ships and in his hospitals, was this other man, Elliot Kerwin, who kept a diary, and he took photographs. And those photographs and diary were recently published. They were meant just for himself and his family. And it's the same story as Grenfell took of life in Labrador, but it was for himself and his family. And it's a private voice. And if you read those diaries, they are universally true. You read them as if somebody today had written them. They're so interesting about characters and people and his own feelings about being in a place that is away from home. So I wrote that book as if Rockwell Kent, who was a very public figure, the New Yorker had said that day will be a precedent when there comes no news from Rockwell Kent. He was in the news every day. And I just thought, what is his private life? What does he really think in himself? And so I think that inner voice is the freeing, liberating voice. If you can get to that, rather than thinking, what is the thing that the public wants me to say? Go for the thing that is the private, uncomfortable thing. Like sometimes we want to write about, I'll be writing about landscape, or I'll say, I went out in the dark, or it was dark in the house. It was so dark, I couldn't see a thing. It was black. Everything was non-visible. I'm writing these things, right? I'm trying to convince myself that it's dark. I'm writing, I'm going, man, this is a bad paragraph. And then I remember, when everything is one way, write about the other. And so instead, I started again. I said, I woke up, and all I could see was a bright slit of light from under the door. See? So that tells you everything else is black. So sometimes you go for the opposite to tell you you're going for the minority feeling all the time. And when you do, you're not negating the majority of everything. That still exists, but the minority is so much more vivid and so much more interesting to hear. And that's kind of what I put in that book. So I'm totally for the interior voice.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to open the floor to any questions. I must say I very much enjoyed chatting with you, although really it was mostly you chatting. You're a man with a wonderful imagination and a great gift for storytelling. Any questions for Michael about the big why, or go ahead, I'll repeat your question.
It isn't about big why, but I was at the family call where you talked, and you talked about the weird things you brought on airplanes.
Right.
And you brought, at the end, you brought out an iceberg that you brought on airplanes. And I was telling the story today to somebody, and they were like, but how did it not melt? Because everyone touched the iceberg.
It did melt.
It did melt. What did it melt?
This is the story about how he brought an iceberg on an airplane, and the question is, how did it not melt?
How did it not melt? Because you passed it around to
Right.
everybody.
Because it was passed around to everybody.
How did it not melt at that event?
Oh, I see.
Okay, so this is a long story about, but I've been curious about things that I've been bringing aboard airplanes for a while. Like I brought lots of things like Christmas trees, little ones that are alive, and I plant them in Newfoundland, and goldfish. My goldfish I bring every summer, and this it was in Newfoundland, and I just saw this iceberg. And I just thought, how can I get that iceberg to Toronto? That was my thought process, right? I let my mind wander, and so I saw this little piece that had broken off. It came to shore, and I carried it back to my freezer, and then I brought it on the plane, and then I did a couple of things with this iceberg in Toronto. But I kept a bit of it in my freezer, and I had it at the show, and I had everybody hold the iceberg, including you. But it's really hard ice. It's 10,000-year-old ice that is so compressed that it takes a while for it to melt. But I didn't end up getting, I think I got a sliver of it back, but it was melting as it went from hand to hand. But I'm glad you were there.
Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Yes?
Where do you think Newfoundland culture will be in a generation?
Where do you think Newfoundland culture will be in a generation?
Oh man, okay.
Good question.
I don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, I'm not a really.
Where do you live?
Where do I live? Okay, follow-up question already. Okay, so I'm here in Toronto 10 months of the year, and I'm in Newfoundland. I entered the CBC writing contest was on the go about 10 years ago, and I thought I was living here in Toronto, but I really miss Newfoundland. Anyway, I just thought I'm going to enter that contest. I'm going to write a short story, and I'm going to win that prize, $6,000. So I wrote up the story, and I read a couple of other winning entries. One was about a birth, and one was about a death. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to write a story about a birth and a death. You know, they'll remember that story. Because it's all blind, you know, and they have thousands of entries. Like, you got to have something happen in your story. So I wrote this really melodramatic story about a birth and a death. And it was on the day of the deadline. I printed it up. It was 5,000 words. And then I finally read the instructions for the contest. And it said 2,500 words. My story was 5,000 words. So in 2 hours, I cut every single line that you didn't need out of that story. I cut it right down to the bone. I had 2,500 words. I printed it off again. I sent it off. And then 3 months later, I got an envelope in the mail saying I'd won. So I went to Ottawa and I got a $6,000 check. I met the jury, and you've never met a more, like, they were like climbing over the chairs to get at me because they wanted to know about the story. Like, how did I write that story? I just kind of went from one thing to another. There was like it all kind of worked, but they couldn't. So I told them about cutting 2,500 words out of it in the last 2 hours. And you've never seen a more disappointed jury in your life. But with that $6,000, I bought a house in Newfoundland around the bay. And as my father said when he saw it, you know, you get what you pay for, which is kind of true. But I still have it. So I'm there in the summers. The idea of where Newfoundland, like I'm not a real, like I don't really write about, you know, dories and fishing and stuff like that. Like I'm not really comfortable with that because I don't really know it. You know, it's not my idea of Newfoundland. But Newfoundland's pretty hot now. It's been hot for about 20 years or so. So I'm riding it. I'm still waiting for those dump trucks full of money to come. They haven't come yet, but maybe. I think the thing is, like when I was young, when I was about 25, this Canadian writer, Norman Levine, who's dead now, he was a short story writer in Ottawa. He came to Newfoundland, and I had read him, and I wanted to meet him. Nobody was reading him. And I interviewed him for this magazine, and I took him around St. John's. He'd never been to Newfoundland before. He said to me, it's a small place, St. John's. He said, do you have interesting friends? And I said, oh yes, I got interesting friends. He said, good. He said, you can stay. He said, if you want to be a writer, you've got to have interesting friends. If you don't have interesting friends, you've got to leave. Find interesting friends. And I sort of feel like that's so true. The trouble with Toronto, for me, is that like my interesting friends in Newfoundland aren't artists. Like they do normal things. Like they're interesting people. Like they work at marine labs for waves that hit oil rigs and things, and they do interesting things, whereas most of my friends in Toronto have been writers. And I still remember the first time I went to like a party in Toronto, like my first literary party, and I was really nervous, and I just went up to this poet and I started talking to her, and she said, I said, I live in a basement apartment, and I said, when I take a bath, like when I shampoo my hair, I put my head in the water and I can hear the subway. And I saw her like kind of clock it, like, interesting. The same way that I do when a friend of mine tells me something interesting and I'm going to write it down. And so I immediately said to her, I said, look, you know that I'm a writer, like this is my material. And she said, oh no. You tell me something like this at a party, like it's anybody's material. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I'd come to a city where this happened. And I said, so are you saying that you come to these like events with like your B material? Like your anecdotes that you're not going to write about? She said, oh yeah, I would never tell anybody at a thing like this anything that I was going to write about. So it took me a long time to realize that I had to find other people to hang out with other than writers. So I know a lot of painters, because painters are generally a little inarticulate, but they're fascinating. And you ask them about things, and they have stories that they're not going to use. So I can plunder, and anything I tell them, they're not going to paint a picture of it. So that's my way around it.
Are you doing an annual Rockwell-Kent journey back from the big city to Newfoundland? Does that ever enter your mind?
Oh yeah, always. I mean, it's really interesting. It's an interesting thing to be in a place where like the language is colloquial. Like there's a guy I buy firewood from, and I went there last summer, and he said it was a rainy day. And I just went there on spec. I didn't know if he was in the woods or not. I'm not going to say he was home. I said, oh, I need a load of wood. Like, I'm glad I caught you home. And he said, oh yeah, on a day like this, I'm busy around the door. I'm busy around the door. That's an interesting phrase, right? Like, he's not going to be in the woods when the weather's, nasty, right? He's going to be, but he'll stay busy at home. So little things like that, I'm just writing them down, and I find in Toronto, like I've got a 10-year-old, and I'm mining the things that kids are saying, but I have to Google them just to make sure that they're not things from a TV show. You know, like the things that are said are not just their own minds, but they're just repeating things they've said. So there's a kind of there's a richness to the language and to the experience of Newfoundland that I think I can't get away from for too long. So I always have to go back.
Any other questions for Michael? Yeah, we'll take one more.
Michael, I haven't read your new book, but I can thank you for probably your time with the Newfoundland.
Oh yeah.
Can you just give me some of that? So can you give me some of your platforms?
Okay, so repeat the question. Yeah, so I wrote a book. My most recent book is about the Newfoundland Regiment in World War I, and thank you for saying that. I appreciate saying that. It was it was 100 years since the Battle of the Somme, where the Newfoundland Regiment lost a lot of men in France, and so I thought I should write a book about it. This man here has a copy of it there. But you know, again, like when I'm coming to a project, I'm looking for the minority report, right? The light under the dark door. And I'm thinking, because there's a dozen great books about Newfoundland's involvement in the First World War, and the last thing I wanted to do was just to repeat the things that have already been said. But one thing that hadn't been said was, like, what is it like for us to visit places where things have happened? Like when we go to a museum or a historical place where there's a plaque and it says, on this site in 1812 this happened. What is the effect on us? So that was the approach to the book that I wanted to have. And so it's a book which sort of is a journey, a book of a journey of me going to these places, which I would never in a million years have gone to on my own. I have no interest in going to a battle site in France to see where a war happened 100 years ago. But it was fascinating when you're there and you're ambushed with feelings when it does occur. And I totally encourage anybody to do it. And to maybe just encapsulate the experience in a nutshell, I was in a museum in St. John's, the Rooms, which is a great museum, and they had these 4 little diaries by Eric Ellis, who was a member of the Newfoundland Regiment. Newfoundland was his own country then. And he went to Scotland, and he was a really good shot, so they didn't let him go to war. They let him train other soldiers and let those other soldiers go to war. And Eric Ellis, in these 4 little Boy Scout notebooks, the little pencil in the spine that they have, you know, he's just dying to go to France. For 4 years, they don't let him go. Finally, in the last month of the war, they let him go, and he joins the regiment in France just as the armistice is signed in November. And he's so pissed off that he's never fired a shot, except at home on leave, bird hunting. It's the only time he's ever shot his gun. And so he's in France, the war is over, but the occupation of Germany has to happen, which is, you know, after the war's over. And the Newfoundland Regiment was one of the regiments that went across the Rhine to occupy Germany. And on the way to Germany, his diary continues, they stop at the plains of Waterloo, where the Napoleonic battle had happened in, 1812. And he says there was a museum there. So we went into the museum. And in the museum, there was a rotunda of Napoleon's battle, with all of his soldiers up on the walls. And Eric Ellis is beside himself, says, I experienced this mural. And I felt like I was experiencing war for the first time. He'd never shot a gun during the World War I. And here was I in a museum reading his journal 100 years after he'd written it, of him experiencing war that had happened 100 years before him. And I realized at that moment that there was a transference there of emotion and experience that could avoid the kind of hindsight of waves of men coming and killing each other, which is very safe. It's a very safe realization of I got back to the terror of what it must be like to witness war in the moment. But thanks for reading that book and saying that. I really appreciate it.
Michael, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming in tonight and sharing your time with us. How about a big hand for Michael Richards? We'll be appearing here every Wednesday from now on. Michael's agreed to stick around and sign copies of your books. If you'd like, there are more books for sale here, and we invite you to stick around for as long as you like. Again, thanks so much for coming out to our pint-sized conversations, and again, a big thanks, Michael.